I was just about to ask, what is the Biden administration's position here? You mentioned the US is observing. And I guess a second part to that question, to piggyback off what you just said, why are they saying we're close if, in fact, the details are as complicated as what you have just outlined?
Yeah, the United States has been fully engaged and fully involved in these ceasefire negotiations from the very beginning, going back to last fall, in the person of CIA Director Bill Burns, who's not just a spy master, but also has a long history in the Middle East as a diplomat. And he's very, very well respected. So if anybody can pull this rabbit out of a hat, it will be Bill Burns. And so this round of negotiations, in fact, the United States is not just involved in passing messages and offering advice. It, along with its Egyptian and Qatari partners, are providing what diplomats call bridging proposals. So saying, hey, there's a difference here between the Israelis and Hamas. Here's our own proposal for how you overcome that obstacle. So that's what's happening in the actual room where they're negotiating right now. Once again, it strikes me that these differences are a lot bigger than the administration is letting on. And it's almost as if the United States wants this ceasefire more than the parties do, but the parties don't want to be blamed for undermining or tanking a ceasefire that they actually really don't want, which is one of these kind of weird, odd, surreal things that happens in these types of negotiations.
Interesting. Do you think the 2024 presidential election plays into the American urge for a ceasefire deal, or is that coming from protests that we've seen on the ground at campuses and across the country? What's driving the US's position here and the Biden administration's position here?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, you cannot look at the situation in Gaza and not understand the suffering of Palestinians there. There's a lot of dispute over the actual numbers of Palestinians who have been killed, regardless of what the numbers. It's too many, and Palestinians have suffered tremendously. And yes, the United States has been roiled by these images coming out of Gaza. You also can't help but feel sympathy for the Israelis, particularly the hostage families. And so there's that kind of urge just at the humanitarian level, and the White House, which has fully backed Israel, though also has assessed at a military level, the Israelis have done so much damage to Hamas that Hamas cannot undertake the kind of attack that it did on October 7th and the massacre of up to 1,200 people, mostly civilians. And so that it's not really worth it for the IDF to continue its military operations in the Gaza Strip. And now is really a time for a ceasefire. Everybody will benefit from the ceasefire. The poor Palestinians will benefit, and the families of hostages, at least those who are alive, will benefit from a ceasefire. And I think that's really what's motivating it. Undoubtedly the case that there are people in the United States who are very unhappy with the Biden administration's approach to the conflict. You had a large block of uncommitted voters in places like Michigan and Minnesota. I suspect, though, that the presidential election won't turn on a foreign policy issue. Americans generally don't vote on a foreign policy issue. So, but this has absolutely roiled the Democratic Party in particular, and is part of the way in which at least the party is approaching its coming convention.